The rain hammered against the grocery store windows as Sarah Martinez stood in line, her designer clothes now wrinkled from the unexpected downpour. She had rushed in without an umbrella, her usual confidence replaced by the discomfort of being soaked through. What started as a quick stop to grab ingredients for dinner had turned into an adventure she hadn't planned for. Sarah owned one of the fastest-growing tech companies in the city, with offices in 12 countries and over 3,000 employees. Her face regularly appeared on magazine covers, and her company's stock price was watched by investors worldwide. But right now she looked like any other woman caught in the rain, her hair dripping and her expensive shoes squeaking against the linoleum floor. She had deliberately chosen this small neighborhood grocery store instead of her usual upscale market. Recently, the pressure of running a billion-dollar company had been overwhelming. The constant meetings, the endless decisions, and the weight of so many people depending on her had left her feeling disconnected from the real world. She longed for simple moments, ordinary experiences that reminded her of who she was before the money and success. The store was busy despite the weather, filled with families doing their weekly shopping and workers grabbing dinner on their way home. Sarah found herself genuinely enjoying the normalcy of it all. She picked up ingredients slowly, reading labels carefully, something she rarely had time to do anymore. The simple act of choosing between different brands of pasta felt refreshing after spending her days making decisions that affected thousands of jobs. As she made her way through the aisles, Sarah noticed the other shoppers around her. There were elderly couples comparing prices, young mothers juggling children and shopping lists, and tired-looking workers just trying to get home. It struck her how different their concerns were from the corporate world she lived in. Here, people worried about stretching their budgets and feeding their families, not about quarterly earnings and market share. At the checkout, Sarah realized she had forgotten her wallet in her other purse. She stood there embarrassed as the cashier waited patiently. The groceries she had selected weren't expensive by her standards, but without any way to pay, they might as well have cost $1 million. She began to explain her situation, feeling foolish and completely out of her element. Behind her in line stood a man in his 30s with a young girl who couldn't have been more than 8 years old. The girl was chattering excitedly about the cookies they were buying, while the man listened patiently, occasionally adding items to their modest cart. His clothes were clean but clearly worn, and Sarah could see him carefully checking prices as he shopped. The man, whose name was David Chen, had been working 2 jobs to support his daughter Emma since his wife passed away 3 years earlier. His morning shift at a local warehouse started at 5 a.m., and his evening job at a restaurant kept him busy until late. Every penny mattered in their household, and grocery shopping required careful planning and budgeting. David noticed the woman in front of them seemed distressed. He could see her checking her pockets repeatedly, and heard her explaining to the cashier that she had forgotten her payment method. Emma tugged on his sleeve, pointing at the woman and whispering that she looked sad. David's daughter had inherited his compassionate nature, always noticing when others were struggling. Without hesitation, David stepped forward and quietly told the cashier he would cover the woman's groceries. Sarah turned around, surprised by the offer from this stranger. She started to protest, explaining it wasn't necessary, but David smiled warmly and insisted it was no trouble at all. Emma nodded enthusiastically, telling Sarah that her daddy always helped people when they needed it. Sarah felt a mix of emotions she couldn't quite identify. Here was a man who clearly had limited resources offering to help someone he had never met. She could see the worn edges of his wallet and noticed how carefully he had selected his own items. Yet he was willing to spend his hard-earned money on a stranger without expecting anything in return. The total for Sarah's groceries came to $43.67. David handed over his debit card without hesitation, while Emma smiled proudly at her father's kindness. Sarah watched this interaction with growing amazement, realizing she was witnessing something truly special in this ordinary grocery store on a rainy Tuesday evening. Sarah tried several times to get David's contact information so she could repay him, but he politely refused each attempt. He simply said that helping others was what people should do, and he didn't want anything in return. Emma chimed in, explaining that her teacher had taught them about random acts of kindness, and this was just one of those moments. As they walked toward the exit together, Sarah learned more about David and Emma. The little girl proudly told her that her daddy worked very hard to take care of her, and that they were saving up for a special trip to the zoo for her birthday next month. David looked slightly embarrassed by his daughter's openness, but didn't stop her from sharing their simple dreams and plans. David worked at Morrison's warehouse during early morning hours, loading trucks and organizing inventory. The pay wasn't great, but it was steady work with decent people. His evening job was at Tony's family restaurant, where he washed dishes and helped with food preparation. The restaurant owner, Tony, had become like a father figure to David after his wife died, often sending him home with leftovers for Emma. Emma attended the local elementary school and stayed with Mrs. Rodriguez, their elderly neighbor, during the hours between David's jobs. Mrs. Rodriguez refused to take payment for watching Emma, saying the little girl was like a granddaughter to her. This network of kindness had helped David manage his difficult situation, though he still struggled to make ends meet each month. Outside the store, Sarah watched as David and Emma walked to an older Honda Civic that had seen better days. The car started with some difficulty, and she could see David's relief when the engine finally turned over. Emma waved goodbye enthusiastically from the passenger window as they drove away into the rainy night. Standing alone in the parking lot, Sarah felt profoundly moved by the encounter. In her world of corporate executives and wealthy clients, she rarely met people like David. His simple generosity, offered without any knowledge of who she was or what she could do for him in return, reminded her of values she had almost forgotten in her climb to success. Sarah drove home in her luxury car, but her thoughts remained with the man and little girl who had touched her heart. Her penthouse apartment felt emptier than usual that night, filled with expensive furniture and artwork that suddenly seemed meaningless compared to the genuine warmth she had witnessed in that grocery store. The next morning, Sarah found herself thinking about David and Emma as she sat in her corner office overlooking the city. Her assistant brought in the usual stack of reports and meeting requests, but Sarah's mind kept wandering back to the previous evening's encounter. She had built her company on the principle of helping others succeed, but somehow she had lost touch with the simple, direct way of helping that David had demonstrated. During her lunch break, Sarah made a decision that surprised even her. Instead of eating at the upscale restaurant where she usually conducted business meetings, she drove back to the neighborhood where the grocery store was located. She wanted to understand more about the community where people like David lived and worked. The area was modest but well-maintained, with small houses and local businesses that had clearly been serving the community for many years. Sarah parked her car and walked down the main street, observing the rhythm of life in this working-class neighborhood. She saw mothers pushing strollers, elderly residents sitting on benches chatting with neighbors, and shop owners sweeping their sidewalks with pride. She stopped at Tony's family restaurant, the place Emma had mentioned her father worked. Through the window she could see it was busy with the lunch crowd, filled with construction workers, office employees, and families enjoying simple, home-cooked meals. The atmosphere was warm and welcoming, completely different from the sterile elegance of the restaurants she usually frequented. Sarah decided to go inside and order lunch. The menu featured honest, affordable food, and the waitress who served her was friendly and efficient. She could hear laughter and conversation from every table, creating an atmosphere of genuine community that money couldn't buy. As she ate, Sarah found herself wondering if David was working in the kitchen, unaware that the woman he had helped the night before was sitting just a few feet away. After lunch, Sarah walked through more of the neighborhood, visiting the local shops and observing the daily life of people who worked hard for modest wages, but seemed to find joy in simple pleasures. She realized that despite all her success and wealth, there were aspects of life and human connection that she had been missing in her pursuit of business achievements. Over the following weeks, Sarah found herself returning to the neighborhood regularly. She would park several blocks away and walk through the streets, observing the daily routines of the residents. She learned that the local elementary school was struggling with outdated computers, and the community center needed repairs to its roof. The public library had limited hours due to budget cuts, and many families relied on it for internet access and after-school programs. Sarah discovered that David wasn't the only person in the community who regularly helped others despite having limited resources. She witnessed neighbors sharing meals with elderly residents, teenagers voluntarily helping younger children with homework, and shop owners extending credit to families going through tough times. The sense of community and mutual support impressed her more than any corporate teamwork she had ever experienced. Emma's school, Lincoln Elementary, was particularly close to Sarah's heart. She learned from conversations she overheard that many children there came from single-parent households like Emma's. The teachers worked tirelessly with minimal supplies, often spending their own money on classroom materials. The school's computer lab had machines that were over 10 years old, making it difficult for students to learn the technology skills they would need for their futures. One afternoon, Sarah was walking past the school when she saw Emma playing on the playground during recess. The little girl was with a group of friends, and Sarah could hear her telling them about how her daddy had helped a nice lady at the grocery store. Emma's version of the story had grown in the telling, and she proudly described how her father was the kindest person in the whole world. Watching Emma play with such joy despite her modest circumstances reminded Sarah of her own childhood. Before her family's business had taken off, they had lived in a neighborhood much like this one. Her parents had taught her the importance of education and hard work, but they had also emphasized kindness and helping others. Somewhere along the way, as her company grew and her wealth increased, she had lost sight of those fundamental values. That evening, Sarah made a phone call that would change everything. She contacted her company's foundation director and asked him to research David Chen and his family situation. She wanted to help, but she was determined to do it in a way that would preserve David's dignity and not make him feel like a charity case. The research revealed that David had indeed faced significant challenges since his wife's death. Medical bills from her illness had depleted their savings, and despite working 2 jobs, he was barely making ends meet. Emma was an excellent student with a particular talent for mathematics, but David worried about affording college when the time came. The old Honda Civic needed major repairs, but David was putting off the expense as long as possible. Sarah's foundation director suggested several ways they could help, without making it obvious that Sarah was behind the assistance. The foundation could offer David a small business loan to start his own delivery service, something he had mentioned wanting to do. They could also establish a scholarship program at Emma's school that would benefit her and other children in similar situations. However, Sarah realized that simply throwing money at the situation wouldn't address the deeper issues she had observed in the community. The neighborhood needed systematic support, not just individual charity. She began developing a plan that would create lasting change while honoring the dignity and strength of the people who lived there. At Morrison's warehouse, David continued his early morning routine, unaware that his life was about to change dramatically. His supervisor had noticed his reliability and positive attitude, and there was talk of promoting him to a team leader position. The extra income would help, but David knew he would still need his second job at the restaurant to make ends meet. Emma was thriving at school despite the challenges at home. Her teacher, Mrs. Peterson, had identified her as gifted in mathematics and was working with her after school to challenge her abilities. Mrs. Peterson often stayed late without extra pay, knowing that students like Emma needed additional support to reach their full potential. The community continued its daily rhythm of mutual support and quiet heroism. Mrs. Rodriguez still watched Emma every afternoon. The restaurant owner, Tony, still sent David home with extra food, and neighbors continued looking out for each other in countless small ways. None of them knew that their acts of kindness had been observed by someone with the power to transform their entire community. Sarah spent hours each day planning her approach. She wanted to ensure that any help she provided would strengthen the community rather than create dependency. Her goal was to amplify the existing spirit of cooperation and mutual support, not replace it with outside charity that might undermine the residents' sense of self-reliance and pride. Sarah decided to approach the situation gradually. Starting with the school system, she arranged for her foundation to make an anonymous donation to Lincoln Elementary, specifically earmarked for new computers and technology equipment. The donation was structured to look like it came from a corporate matching program for employee contributions, making it seem like a normal business grant rather than targeted charity. When the new computers arrived at Emma's school, the excitement was infectious. Students who had never worked with modern technology suddenly had access to current software and high-speed internet. Mrs. Peterson and the other teachers were thrilled to be able to offer their students the same advantages that children in wealthier districts took for granted. Emma came home from school bubbling with enthusiasm about the new computer lab. She told David about learning to create presentations and how her math teacher was showing them educational games that made learning fun. David was delighted to see his daughter so excited about school, though he wondered what fortunate circumstance had brought such resources to their neighborhood school. Around the same time, Sarah arranged for her foundation to sponsor a community development initiative in the area. The program was designed to look like a standard urban renewal project, offering small business loans, job training programs, and infrastructure improvements. David heard about the opportunity from Tony at the restaurant, who encouraged him to apply for assistance with starting his delivery service. The application process was straightforward, and David was surprised when he was quickly approved for a low-interest loan to purchase a reliable delivery van and start his own business. The loan officer explained that his steady work history and positive references from both of his current employers had made him an ideal candidate for the program. With the new business opportunity, David would be able to leave his grueling schedule of 2 jobs and focus on building something of his own. The delivery service would allow him to have more flexible hours and spend more time with Emma while still earning enough to support their modest lifestyle. For the first time since his wife's death, David felt genuinely hopeful about their future. Sarah watched these developments unfold from a distance, feeling a satisfaction she had never experienced from any of her business achievements. Seeing David's excitement about starting his own company reminded her of her own early days as an entrepreneur, when every small success had felt like a major victory. However, Sarah knew that individual success stories weren't enough to create lasting change in the community. She began working with local leaders to develop a comprehensive neighborhood improvement plan. The initiative would include upgraded infrastructure, expanded community programs, and support for local businesses, all funded through her foundation but managed by residents themselves. The community center became the hub of these improvement efforts. Sarah's foundation provided funding for roof repairs and facility upgrades, but the residents organized volunteer workdays to handle much of the labor themselves. Watching neighbors work together to improve their shared spaces reinforced Sarah's belief that the community's greatest strength was its people, not any external resources they might receive. Mrs. Rodriguez, the elderly woman who watched Emma, became an unofficial coordinator for many of the community improvement projects. Her decades of living in the neighborhood gave her valuable insights into what changes would be most beneficial. Sarah was impressed by the woman's wisdom and organizational skills, recognizing leadership qualities that would be valued in any corporate setting. Emma's teacher, Mrs. Peterson, was selected to head a new after-school tutoring program funded by Sarah's foundation. The program would provide academic support for children from single-parent households and help prepare promising students like Emma for advanced educational opportunities. Mrs. Peterson's dedication to her students made her the perfect choice to lead this important initiative. As these various programs took shape, Sarah realized that her approach was working exactly as she had hoped. The community was benefiting from additional resources, but the improvements were being driven by the residents themselves. The external funding was amplifying their existing strengths rather than replacing their self-reliance with dependence on charity. David's delivery business was growing steadily, serving both residential customers and local businesses. His reputation for reliability and friendly service was spreading through word of mouth, and he was beginning to hire part-time drivers to help with the increasing demand. The flexible schedule allowed him to volunteer at Emma's school and be more involved in community activities. One evening, as Sarah walked through the neighborhood observing the positive changes, she felt a deep sense of fulfillment. Her wealth and business success had finally found a purpose that aligned with her values and made a meaningful difference in people's lives. 3 months after that rainy evening in the grocery store, Sarah made a decision that surprised everyone, including herself. She announced to her board of directors that she would be taking a sabbatical from her CEO duties to focus on community development work. Her second-in-command would handle day-to-day operations, while Sarah pursued what she called a different kind of investment in human potential. The business media was buzzing with speculation about Sarah's unusual decision. Forbes ran an article questioning whether she was having a midlife crisis, while other publications wondered if she was preparing to run for political office. None of them guessed that her motivation stemmed from a chance encounter with a single father and his daughter in a neighborhood grocery store. Sarah rented a small office space in David's neighborhood, just a few blocks from Emma's school. She hired local residents to help manage her foundation's community programs, creating jobs while ensuring that people who understood the area's needs were making important decisions. Her corporate headquarters downtown seemed like a distant world compared to this grassroots operation. David's delivery business was thriving beyond his wildest expectations. What had started as a simple service for busy families had expanded to include partnerships with local restaurants and small retailers who needed reliable transportation for their products. Emma proudly told her classmates that her daddy was now a real business owner, and she loved helping him organize delivery schedules on weekends. The success of David's business attracted attention from other aspiring entrepreneurs in the neighborhood. Sarah's foundation began offering business development workshops and mentoring programs, connecting experienced professionals with local residents who had innovative ideas but lacked the resources to pursue them. The community was becoming a hub of small business activity and creative energy. Emma's mathematical abilities continued to flourish with the enhanced educational resources at her school. Mrs. Peterson had recommended her for an advanced mathematics program at the community college, where high school students could earn college credits while still attending their regular classes. David was initially worried about the additional time commitment, but Emma's enthusiasm convinced him to support her academic pursuits. One Saturday afternoon, Sarah was working in her neighborhood office when she heard familiar voices outside. Looking through the window, she saw David and Emma walking past with grocery bags heading home from their weekly shopping trip. Emma was chattering excitedly about a science project while David listened attentively, occasionally asking questions that showed his genuine interest in her schoolwork. Sarah felt a sudden urge to go outside and finally reveal her identity to the man who had unknowingly changed her life's direction. She had been observing their progress from a distance for months, but she longed to thank David personally for his act of kindness and to share in his joy about the positive changes in their circumstances. However, she hesitated at the door, uncertain about how David might react to learning that the woman he had helped was behind all the opportunities that had come his way. Would he feel manipulated? Would it diminish the genuine satisfaction he felt about building his business through his own hard work? Sarah realized that revealing the truth might be more about her own emotional needs than about what would be best for David and Emma. Instead, Sarah decided to continue her work quietly, finding fulfillment in seeing the community thrive without needing recognition for her role in the transformation. She had learned that the most meaningful charitable work often happened behind the scenes, supporting others while allowing them to maintain their dignity and sense of personal accomplishment. The neighborhood continued to evolve in positive ways. Property values were rising slightly, but not so dramatically as to displace long-term residents. New businesses were opening, created by locals who had received training and support through Sarah's programs. The elementary school was becoming known throughout the district for its innovative technology program and high student achievement scores. Mrs. Rodriguez had become something of a celebrity in the community for her leadership in organizing volunteer activities and neighborhood improvement projects. At 78 years old, she had more energy and enthusiasm than people half her age. Her small apartment had become an unofficial community center, where residents gathered to plan events and discuss local issues. Tony's family restaurant was busier than ever, benefiting from the increased foot traffic as the neighborhood attracted visitors from other parts of the city. Tony had been able to hire additional staff, including several young people from the community who were working their way through college. David still stopped by regularly, now as a successful business owner rather than an employee, but Tony treated him with the same warmth and respect he had always shown. The success stories were multiplying throughout the community. Single mothers were starting small businesses. Teenagers were participating in internship programs with local companies, and elderly residents were finding new purposes through volunteer opportunities. The foundation's investment was generating returns that couldn't be measured in dollars, but were visible in the increased hope and opportunity that surrounded everyone who lived there. 6 months had passed since Sarah's life-changing encounter at the grocery store, and she was preparing for what she knew would be an emotional day. Emma's 9th birthday was approaching, and David had finally saved enough money to take her on that special zoo trip she had dreamed about. Sarah had learned about their plans through Mrs. Rodriguez, who mentioned it during one of their community planning meetings. Sarah decided this would be the perfect opportunity to finally meet David and Emma again, this time under more natural circumstances. She arranged to visit the zoo on the same day, hoping for a casual encounter that wouldn't seem forced or suspicious. Her plan was simple. If they happened to cross paths, she would reintroduce herself as the woman from the grocery store and thank David again for his kindness. The morning of Emma's birthday was bright and sunny, perfect weather for a zoo visit. David had taken the entire day off from his delivery business, something he rarely did, but Emma's happiness was worth any lost income. She had been counting down the days to this trip, reading books about animals and making lists of everything she wanted to see. At the zoo, Emma's excitement was contagious. She marveled at every animal exhibit, asked countless questions about wildlife conservation, and carefully read every information plaque they encountered. David found himself learning as much as his daughter, amazed by her curiosity and intelligence. The expensive trip felt like the best investment he had ever made. Sarah arrived at the zoo mid-morning and began walking through the exhibits, keeping an eye out for David and Emma, while genuinely enjoying the animals herself. She realized it had been years since she had taken time for such simple pleasures, and the experience reminded her of childhood visits to this same zoo with her own parents. Near the penguin exhibit, Sarah spotted Emma's distinctive red backpack and heard her animated voice explaining penguin behavior to her father. David was listening patiently, asking thoughtful questions that encouraged Emma to share more of what she had learned from her research. The scene was so touching that Sarah almost decided not to interrupt their special day together. However, Emma noticed Sarah first. The little girl's face lit up with recognition, and she tugged on David's sleeve excitedly. "Daddy, that's the nice lady from the grocery store. The one you helped when it was raining." Emma's enthusiasm made it impossible for Sarah to blend back into the crowd unnoticed. David turned around and immediately recognized Sarah, though she looked quite different in casual weekend clothes than she had in her rain-soaked professional attire. His face showed surprise and genuine pleasure at seeing her again. "What a wonderful coincidence," he said warmly. "I've often wondered how you were doing after that evening." Sarah felt her carefully planned words disappear as she looked at David and Emma's smiling faces. Instead, she found herself speaking from the heart. "I've thought about both of you so many times," she said honestly. "Your kindness that night meant more to me than you could possibly know." Emma immediately invited Sarah to join them for the rest of their zoo visit, and David seconded the invitation with characteristic generosity. Sarah accepted gratefully, touched by their openness to sharing Emma's special birthday celebration with someone they barely knew. As they walked through the exhibits together, Sarah felt a warmth and connection she rarely experienced in her usual social circles. During their zoo visit, Sarah learned more about David and Emma's daily life, their hopes and dreams, and the strong bond between father and daughter. Emma proudly told Sarah about her advanced mathematics classes and her father's successful delivery business. David shared his pride in Emma's academic achievements and his gratitude for the opportunities that had recently come their way. When Emma mentioned how much their neighborhood had improved lately, with better schools and new community programs, Sarah had to work hard to keep her expression neutral. Hearing David and Emma discuss these changes as fortunate coincidences rather than targeted assistance confirmed that Sarah's approach had been successful in preserving their dignity and sense of self-reliance. As the day progressed, Sarah found herself genuinely enjoying David's company as an adult friend, not just as the recipient of her charitable efforts. He was intelligent, thoughtful, and had a gentle sense of humor that made conversation easy and natural. Emma clearly adored her father and took pride in his accomplishments, creating a family dynamic that Sarah envied despite all her professional success. At lunch in the zoo's cafeteria, Emma asked Sarah about her work and family. Sarah kept her answers vague, describing herself as someone involved in business consulting and community development. When Emma asked if she had children, Sarah felt a pang of longing as she admitted she didn't, but added that she enjoyed working with young people through various programs. The afternoon flew by as they visited more exhibits, and Emma continued to demonstrate her knowledge about animals and conservation. David captured photos of Emma with various animals, and Sarah offered to take pictures of father and daughter together. Looking through the camera lens at their happy faces, Sarah felt a deep satisfaction that had nothing to do with business achievements or financial success. As their wonderful day at the zoo came to an end, Sarah faced a decision that would define her relationship with David and Emma going forward. Standing in the parking lot as they prepared to say goodbye, she felt the weight of her secret knowledge about their lives and her role in their recent good fortune. Emma solved Sarah's dilemma in the way that only children can. She threw her arms around Sarah's waist and declared that she was now part of their family of friends. "You have to come to my real birthday party next weekend," Emma insisted. "Daddy's making my favorite cake and Mrs. Rodriguez is coming and all my school friends will be there." David smiled at his daughter's enthusiasm, but gave Sarah an out. "Emma gets excited about including everyone in our celebrations," he explained gently. "Please don't feel obligated, but you're certainly welcome if you'd like to join us for a simple neighborhood birthday party." Sarah looked at David's kind face and Emma's hopeful expression, and she realized that she wanted nothing more than to be part of their circle of genuine relationships. "I would be honored to attend Emma's birthday party," she said, meaning every word. The following week passed quickly, with Sarah finding herself looking forward to the birthday party more than any corporate event she had attended in years. She spent considerable time choosing an appropriate gift for Emma, finally settling on a set of advanced mathematics, books and puzzles that would challenge the girl's abilities without seeming too expensive or elaborate. Emma's birthday party was held in the community center that Sarah's foundation had helped renovate. The room was decorated with colorful balloons and homemade banners, and about 20 children from Emma's class were in attendance along with their parents. Mrs. Rodriguez had helped David organize games and activities, and the atmosphere was warm and joyful in a way that money couldn't buy. Sarah arrived to find herself welcomed like an old friend by people she was meeting for the first time. David had apparently told the story of their grocery store encounter, portraying Sarah as a kind woman who had become part of their extended community family. She was touched by how easily she was accepted into their circle. During the party, Sarah had the opportunity to meet many of the people whose lives had been positively affected by her foundation's work, though none of them knew of her connection to their improved circumstances. She met parents whose children were thriving in the upgraded school programs, small business owners who had received training and support, and community leaders who were organizing neighborhood improvement projects. Mrs. Peterson, Emma's teacher, was particularly impressive as she described the changes at Lincoln Elementary. "It's amazing how everything seemed to turn around at the same time," she said to Sarah. "New technology, additional programs, more community support. Sometimes good things just align perfectly to create positive change." As Emma opened her presents, Sarah watched David's face carefully. When his daughter reached the mathematics books, her eyes lit up with genuine excitement. David looked surprised and perhaps slightly concerned about the expense, but Emma's enthusiasm was infectious. "These are exactly the kind of books I wanted," Emma exclaimed. "How did you know?" Sarah simply smiled and said she had remembered Emma mentioning her love of mathematics during their zoo visit. David's expression showed gratitude mixed with a slight concern that Sarah was perhaps being too generous for someone they had only recently reconnected with. Later in the evening, as the party was winding down and parents were collecting their children, Sarah found herself helping David and Mrs. Rodriguez clean up. Working together on such a simple task felt more satisfying than presiding over any board meeting she had ever attended. David walked Sarah to her car as the evening ended, thanking her again for making Emma's day so special. "You know," he said thoughtfully, "that night at the grocery store started something important for both of us. Your kindness in accepting my help made me feel useful in a way I hadn't experienced since my wife died. Sometimes helping others helps us just as much." Sarah felt tears forming in her eyes as she realized that David had given her far more than she could ever give him in return. His simple act of generosity had restored her connection to what truly mattered in life, and had led her to find purpose beyond business success and financial achievement. As she drove home, Sarah reflected on the journey that had brought her to this point. A chance encounter during a rainstorm had transformed not only her own life, but had created ripple effects throughout an entire community. David's kindness had inspired her to use her resources in ways that honored the dignity and strength of people who needed support, not charity. The next morning, Sarah returned to her corporate headquarters with a new sense of purpose. She had decided to make community development a permanent part of her business model, using her company's resources to create opportunities for people like David while allowing them to maintain their pride and self-reliance. Emma continued to excel, in school and eventually earned a full scholarship to study mathematics at a prestigious university. David's delivery business grew into a successful logistics company that provided jobs for dozens of people in their community. Mrs. Rodriguez lived to see her 100th birthday, surrounded by neighbors who considered her family. And Sarah never again forgot the lesson she learned that rainy evening in a grocery store, that true wealth comes not from what we accumulate for ourselves, but from what we give to others in ways that help them discover their own strength and potential.